My father said my sister was the priority the way other men commented on the weather. No anger, no raised voice. He just set his coffee mug down, looked across the table, and said it in that flat, practical tone men like him use when they want cruelty to sound reasonable. My mother went still. Brenna kept staring at her phone, and I sat there with a paper napkin in my hand, feeling something inside me go so quiet, it almost passed for peace. Brenna needs this more than you do, he said. Needs this. Like I was asking for medicine instead of a seat on a cruise my own family had spent the last 10 minutes discussing right in front of me. My name is Corinne Hale. I'm 31 years old, and by that Saturday morning, I had already spent most of my adult life learning how to take a hit without letting it show on my face. The dining room smelled like coffee and warm cinnamon rolls, the kind my mother only made when she wanted the room to feel kinder than the truth. Sunlight slid across the table, over the glossy cruise brochure, over my father's wrist, over the bright pink nails Brenna kept tapping against her screen. She still didn't look up. She never did when something was being handed to her that belonged, in some quieter way, to me. It's only a few days, my mother said softly. You know your father's under a lot of pressure. Dad leaned back in his chair. Your sister's fragile right now. You're stronger. Somebody has to stay and keep an eye on things here. That was how they always did it. They dressed the insult up as praise, then waited for me to save them from the ugliness of what they'd just said. Brenna finally reached for the folder near Dad's elbow and smiled at something inside it. A boarding pass. Hers, not mine. I gave one small nod because if I had spoken too quickly, I might have said something none of them could pretend not to hear. And as I looked around that dining room at the table, the appliances, the little comforts I had paid for one careful purchase at a time, one thought rose so clearly it unsettled me if Brenna was the priority. Then what in that house was really theirs? And as always, this story is a work of fiction, written by the Revenge Pulse team for storytelling purposes, though the kinds of wounds it touches are painfully familiar to real life. I walked them out anyway. That was the part that almost made me laugh later. Not because it was funny, because even after what my father had said, my body still moved on old training. I followed them to the driveway, held the screen door open, and stood there while my mother adjusted her purse and checked the tote bag with the passports for the third time. Water the plants twice, she said. The one in the den dries out faster. I nodded. And don't forget the mail. If the electric bill comes, just pay it so it doesn't sit there. Just pay it. Like that sentence had not been eating years of my life. My father gave me a half hug at the car, already turning away before it could mean anything. Brenna was in the front seat with sunglasses on her head, lifting her phone for a picture before they'd even backed out of the driveway. Her smile was bright, careless, already halfway on vacation. Then they were gone. The house changed the second the engine noise disappeared. I walked through the living room first. The gray sectional I bought after the old couch split apart. The television I replaced because Dad wanted football in something bigger than a blur. In the laundry room, the washer and dryer I paid for when the old set died during the same month his health went bad, and Mom kept saying, "We'll deal with it later." Later had a way of becoming me. At my desk upstairs, I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the old folder. Receipts, statements, warranty cards, delivery confirmations. I had never called it keeping score. It was just what happened when you were always the one covering the gap. I started adding. The total came faster than I expected, and it was bigger than anything I had ever let myself say out loud. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the number. Then I opened my laptop, created a new file, and typed 4 words at the top what I paid for. Once I started the spreadsheet, I didn't stop. Item, cost, date, proof. I built it the same way I had built everything else in that house, quietly, carefully, without expecting thanks. The sofa went first, then the television, then the washer and dryer I bought the month my father got sick, and everything in that house started breaking at once. Most lines came down to the same story: they needed something, and I paid for it. By Sunday afternoon, I had a moving company booked for Tuesday. I wasn't in a panic. That was the strange part. I wasn't crying, pacing, or throwing dishes. I was doing what I always did when something serious had to be handled. I made a plan. I called Nina that night. She listened, then asked, "You're only taking what's yours?" "Yes." "Then take everything you can prove." That was all. No speech about family. No warning about regret. On Monday, I printed labels and went room by room. Every tag I pressed down felt like touching the truth. Mine. Not because I was greedy. Because I was done leaving pieces of my life behind for people who had mistaken my support for background noise. I changed my mailing address, moved my accounts, and put a deposit on a small furnished apartment near work. In the kitchen, I paused over the coffee maker. My mother used it every morning. Then I labeled that too. Tuesday morning. The movers arrived right on time. Everything marked goes. One of them asked, yes. They worked fast. The living room opened up first, then the laundry room, then the dining room. By the end, only the old things were left: my father's recliner, a crooked lamp, a few tired pieces from before I started making that house livable. I walked over to the recliner and dragged it into the center of the empty living room. That chair was the whole story. Their old life, sitting in the middle of everything I had spent years building around it. When the truck pulled away, I locked the front door for the last time and looked through the window at the bare room beyond it. I wasn't leaving home. I was done carrying it. The first week in the apartment was so quiet, it made me uneasy. I kept waiting for interruption. My mother asking about a bill. My father needing help with something he could have learned years ago. Brenna wanting a favor dressed up as nothing. But none of it came. I made coffee in my own machine, sat on my own sofa, and ate dinner without listening for footsteps or moods. Peace took a few days to stop feeling suspicious. Then the cruise ended. My phone started buzzing before sunset. One call, then another. Then 6 more stacked on top of each other. A text from Nina came through with a photo attached. I opened it and saw the 3 of them standing in the doorway of the house, frozen. My father stiff with rage. My mother with one hand at her throat. Brenna staring into the living room like she had opened the wrong front door. Then I remembered the family location app. I had never removed myself. By the time they got to my apartment, they weren't calling anymore. They were pounding. "Open the door," my father shouted. I stood there for one long breath, then unlocked it. They came in furious. My father red-faced. My mother already crying. Brenna furious in that polished way people get when they're used to being wrong without consequences. "You're jealous," she snapped. "That's what this is. You couldn't stand not being invited." My mother looked around my living room and made a small, broken sound, because that was the real shock. Not that the house was empty, that everything looked right here. My sofa against my wall. My coffee maker on my counter. My table under my light. Nothing looked stolen. It looked returned. "How could you do this to us?" my father said. I let them spend their anger. Then I gave them the only sentence that mattered. "I took what I paid for." My father stared at me. "You bought things for this family. That doesn't mean you get to strip the house bare like some stranger sending a bill." I looked at him and said, "No. It means you got used to calling it family when I was the one paying." That landed harder. They left angry, loud, and certain they were the victims. After the door slammed, I stood in the silence and looked around my apartment. they still thought this was about hurt feelings. They had no idea they had just stepped into the first honest accounting of their lives. They moved fast. By the next morning, the story was already moving through the family the way ugly stories always do, cleaner, simpler, and much kinder to the people telling them. My aunt texted first. Then a cousin I only heard from at holidays. Then a woman from church who had known my mother long enough to mistake familiarity for permission. The version they were selling was brutally neat. I was bitter because I hadn't been invited on the cruise. I had stripped the house out of spite. I had abandoned my parents after everything they had done for me. No one mentioned receipts or bills, or the years that had quietly gone into groceries, utilities, broken appliances, and every small emergency families call temporary when they expect one person to keep absorbing them. Brenna added her part in the family group. She's always hated that people care about me. That told me she still didn't understand what this was about. The texts kept coming. How could you do this? That's still your mother and father. You could have handled this privately. That last one almost made me laugh. As if I hadn't already spent years handling it privately in checks, card payments, delivery confirmations, and all the quiet yeses no one ever had to thank me for. I wanted to answer. My hands actually twitched for it. But when Nina came by that night with takeout and saw my face, she said, "Don't argue with people who need you to be the villain. They'll only use your words to patch their version." So I sent one reply to everyone. Everything I took was paid for by me. I have records. If you want proof, ask. Only 2 people did. That told me more than the messages had. The next evening, my mother called, her voice already shaking in the places she knew usually worked. "Your father wants you at the house tomorrow. We need to talk like adults. I'll be there," I said. That night, I laid everything out on my bed. Binder, iPad, receipts, statements, warranty cards, timeline of payments. I wasn't getting ready for a family meeting. I was getting ready to show them what they had turned my love into. A ledger. The house echoed when I walked in. My father had dragged his old recliner back into the center of the living room, as if putting one familiar thing in the middle could make the rest of the house feel less exposed. He stood beside it with his arms crossed. My mother sat on the edge of the cushion, already tense. Brenna leaned against the wall, chin up, still trying to look like she had the right to judge me inside a room I had once furnished. Dad started before I had even set my bag down. "You've taken this too far," my mother added. "You've humiliated this family. Bring everything back," Brenna said. "Then maybe we can talk." I set my bag on the floor, took out the binder, and opened it on the bare hardwood. The first tab was living room. I turned the iPad toward them. Item, cost, date, proof, the sectional. I said, "Paid on my card. Delivery signed by me." Dad cut in. "That was for the house." I turned the page, the television, warranty in my name. Another page, coffee table, lamp, end tables. Then kitchen, then laundry, then utilities, electric, internet, grocery transfers, late notices, paid before shutoff. Every time my father tried to interrupt, I answered with another document. Every time my mother started to cry, I kept going. The room changed slowly. Anger first, then confusion, then panic. Because this was no longer a family argument. It was math. Then I opened the tab I had saved for last. Medical rollover. For the first time. Brenna stopped looking bored. My mother went pale before I said a word. After my father's hospital stay, there were bills they couldn't cover cleanly. Balances got pushed around, split up, buried across cards and payment plans, so the strain would not show too clearly while they were trying to protect the house. My mother had stood in the kitchen and told me they just needed a little help getting through the worst of it. It had not been a little. I laid the statements out, one by one. Brenna looked from the papers to my father like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. His face went red, but not with anger, with exposure. I looked right at him. You didn't leave behind the daughter who mattered less. You left behind the one who had been carrying what you were too proud to admit was falling apart. No one moved. Then my father asked the only question a man like him would ask, when shame finally cornered him. Who else knows about this? I didn't post anything. That surprised people. They expected screenshots, long captions, some public speech about betrayal. But by then, I understood something my family still didn't when the truth is documented well enough. It doesn't need theater. So I answered only the people who had already written to me. Everything I took was paid for by me. I have records. If you want proof, ask. That was all. A few did. Most didn't. Certainty makes people nervous. By the end of the week, some of the same relatives who had rushed to judge me had gone quiet. One older cousin called just to clear his throat and say, "Well, that sounds different from what your mother told us." Different was a polite word for it. Then my father made his mistake. He started calling people himself. Not to apologize. To regain control. He told relatives it was all confusion over household property. He said I had chosen to help, so I had no right to act like a creditor now. He even said I was exaggerating the medical bills to make them look worse than they were. That version might have worked if he had stopped there. But one of my aunts asked the wrong question in front of the wrong people. If things were that tight, she said, why were you taking Brenna on a cruise? No one had an answer that survived daylight. That line moved faster than anything my mother or father had said all week. For the first time, people stopped talking about Brenna like she was fragile. They started seeing what she had actually been inside that house. The daughter cushioned by labor she never had to notice because I kept supplying it. And the more my father tried to explain, the worse it sounded. At work, whole days passed without interruption. No calls about bills. No sudden crisis wrapped in guilt. My mind felt clearer. My shoulders felt lighter. My life finally had edges again. My mother's messages changed first. Softer now. Less command. More caution. My father said nothing. That silence used to control the temperature of my whole week. Now it just sounded like a man running out of places to hide. 3 days later, I got an email from a real estate office handling a document request tied to my parents' house. That was when I realized the story wasn't done. The email turned into a short phone call the next morning. The man introduced himself as Owen Pike, part of the office handling paperwork tied to my parents' house. He got to the point quickly. My parents were asking about options refinancing, selling, maybe downsizing, and in the middle of that review, my name kept surfacing: repair invoices, appliance records, payment confirmations, house costs, paid by me. I'm not calling to take sides. He said, I'm calling because the paper trail is deeper than they presented. That was enough. Years my parents now described as tight but manageable had only looked manageable because I kept stepping between their problems and the consequences. And one detail landed harder than the rest. The cruise had been booked while basic obligations were still unstable. Not a disaster, but unstable enough that decent people would have waited. My parents hadn't. An hour later, my father called. Can we talk? He asked. Just the two of us. I met him at a coffee shop halfway between my apartment and the old house. He looked older than he had a week before. At first, he tried regret. You should have told us how much you were carrying. Then came the sentence that finished something in me for good. I didn't know it was that much. He said it like not knowing made it smaller. I set my cup down. You knew enough to call Brenna the priority. That ended it. Even if we sat there another minute after that, Later that afternoon, my mother texted asking if we could all try family therapy. I told her therapy meant nothing if the goal was to put me back where they had always preferred me quiet, useful, and easy to spend. That night, my phone buzzed. It was Brenna. "Can we meet?" Just us. I met Brenna at the old brunch place near the water, the one with chipped white mugs and a patio that always smelled faintly of salt and fryer oil. We used to come there when there was still room between us for pretending. She would order something expensive, talk about plans she never kept, and I would reach for the check before she even looked at it. Back then, I told myself it was easier that way. She was already there when I arrived. No sunglasses. No bright little act. She looked tired in a way I had never seen on her before. "I'm sorry," she said almost immediately. It wasn't polished. That was what made me listen. "I knew Mom and Dad leaned toward me," she said. "And I knew you paid for more than they ever admitted. I didn't know how bad it really was." I said nothing. Then she gave me the part that was actually true. I think I knew enough to ask questions. I just never did. It was easier not to. That landed harder than the apology. "You didn't need answers," I said. "You just needed my life to keep stretching far enough to cover yours." She looked down at the table. For once, she didn't defend herself, didn't cry, didn't ask me to soften it for her. After a minute, she said quietly, "When Dad said I was the priority, I let him. I liked being chosen." There it was. Not innocence, not confusion, just the first clean look at the truth. We ate after that. Talked a little more, not enough to fix anything, enough to stop lying about what it had been. When the check came, Brenna glanced at it and then at me. The old habit showing up so fast it was almost muscle memory. I reached first. I counted my meal, my coffee, my share of the tip, and put the cash on the tray. "That's mine," I said. She looked at the money for a second, then opened her wallet. It was such a small thing, but it was the first real bill I had ever watched her meet without me stepping in front of it. A few days later, the truth about the house settled into fact. My parents were going to have to sell or downsize, not because I had ruined them, because the structure they had been living on was gone. And that structure had been me. That night, Nina came over with takeout and cheap wine. She raised her glass to breathing room. I clinked mine against hers and smiled. For the first time in years, enough felt like enough. A few months later, the apartment still wasn't big. It didn't need to be. By then it had become something the old house never was for me. Even when I was paying to keep it comfortable, it was mine in the full sense of the word. Not just the lease, not just the furniture, the silence, the rhythm, the fact that nothing inside it was waiting to be taken from me and renamed family duty. I owned a few things I genuinely loved now. A lamp I chose because I liked the light it gave off at night. 2 framed prints I bought without asking whether anyone else would think they were practical. The phone almost never rang with somebody else's emergency tied to my name. At work, people noticed the difference before I said anything. I was sharper, less tired in the eyes, more present. More of my life belonged to me now. And it showed. Dad sent a message once in a while. Short. Careful. Mom texted photos of the condo they had moved into. Brenna had a job now, then more hours, then something closer to a real routine. For the first time in her life, money had edges. One morning before work, I stood in my kitchen and made coffee in the same machine I had once bought for that old house. The smell filled the room, slowly warm, familiar, clean. And it hit me that some people spend years pouring themselves out into lives that only notice the warmth once it is gone. That was the lesson. Not every door you close is a loss. Some are the first lock you turn to protect what is left of you. My father said my sister was the priority. He was right about one thing. Someone had to be. It just took me leaving to understand it had to be me. And if Corinne's story stayed with you, tell me in the comments, what was the exact moment you knew she was done being used? And have you ever had to choose yourself before your own family was ready to let you?